I just wanted to go over some things that I learned as the plumber was installing a toilet for me. And there are some little tricks that you can do to help the process if you're going to do it yourself. And I'm just going to go over some of that stuff now. Okay, the number one thing you should do when you replace your toilet is replace the bolts. They're closet bolts that bolt to the floor. And usually the bolts that are on the old toilet, you think you can reuse them. They look really good and all that. The problem is they've already been cut. And when you're trying to line the toilet to the bottom of the bowl, and if you're by yourself, it's even harder. One thing you want to do is, if you can, get somebody else to help you with the toilet. Some of these toilets are getting pretty heavy now. They're pretty large, some of them. So if you have two people, one to align the bolts while you put the toilet down, that's the way to go. We want to try to make the toilet as light as possible as well. So remove the top lid off the toilet, perhaps even remove the seat. Any little bit help. But the plumber that I spoke to, he basically just threw out the bolts I had in there. And I was questioning, why would he do that? And I think it's more that the new bolts are longer bolts. So when you go to align the toilet, you have a great chance of missing that wax ring without messing it up in the beginning, so that you can adjust the toilet higher off the wax ring. And then when you put it down, it'll be nice and smooth. You don't turn it or anything like that. So don't reuse those old bolts. Get new bolts. I'm going to leave a link in the description below for this hacksaw that I found on Amazon. I use a little hacksaw to cut the bolts. I don't use like a giant hacksaw or anything else, or a grinder or anything like that. I use this little tiny hacksaw. It works great. So most people will use a standard wax ring. You think, well, it's standard, it's been around for years, it should be good for your toilet. This is also one of the cheaper wax rings. And I want to tell you right now that if you start using these standard wax rings, you're going to have leaks, sewer gas leaks, and water leaks. They're not as wide as they should be. I don't know why, or if they just started making them thinner, but they do not work like they used to do in the past. So don't use a standard wax ring in this case. Now I'm going to show you some other wax rings besides this one, and I'm going to tell you not to use those either. A Fluid Master wax ring, and it looks like a good device. It gets some decent reviews, but if you look at the ones and twos, say that it fails. And I don't know if you could believe the reviews on this or not, but I've picked this up at the store, and the black piece on the bottom doesn't move. It's really solid. So if you have a flange that is not even, I'm not sure how this will work. I know it won't work with a flange that is even to the floor, and that's what I had. So I didn't use this flange on purpose. And I think all these specialty flanges are kind of like that. Like, depending on how the flange is set on the floor is depending if it works or not. I can tell you right now, the standard flanges that are even with the tile, I'm not having much luck with these fancy flanges. Now here's another one, Perfect Seal. This one has a wax ring built into it, but it also has some plastic material on it as well. And it's known for being able to be removed, and you might be able to move it, but that wax is going to spread all over the place. That's real wax on that thing. I wouldn't trust it. I don't know. It's something that the reviews 1 and 2s tell you what the problems are. If you look at the 4s and 5s, they look like it'll work great, but if you look at some of the other reviews, it's not that great. Now my go-to wax ring when a standard one wouldn't work was the Sandy Seal one. It's the green one, and it's like vinyl. And I'll tell you what, the easiest one to install. They give you new screws, the closet screws, and it's the easiest to install and the one that you can't mess up at all. The problem is, I was reading reviews from later, like people that had it for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and the green material deteriorates, and you don't want to use that. It pretty much disintegrates under the toilet. These things would be great if they made it out of material that didn't do that. These are so easy to use, but I would not recommend using these because in the future you're going to have problems. And then finally, what I would suggest to use is an extra thick wax ring. I think you should use that every time you do a toilet, is use an extra thick wax ring. If you could get the kind that doesn't have the little plastic flange on it, I would get that, but they're getting hard to find. The plumber that I spoke to uses the extra thick wax ring, but his didn't have the flange. I know some plumbers don't like that flange. That's all we really have access to as a consumer. And I haven't been able to find the extra thick wax ring without that flange. So if you have to, that would be the one that I would get. Well, after you got the toilet all set and you test for leaks, and after a couple days, you probably want to seal up the toilet between the floor and the toilet itself. You could use grout or you could use caulking. I like to use grout because it gives the toilet a more stable support for the weight that's going to be on it. And you know, it's easy to apply. It's not as hard as it sounds. Basically, you buy the grout, and I got this grout from Lowe's, and you mix it with water, and you apply it with like a putty knife. You try to make it as small as possible, and then you use a sponge. There's a lot of videos on how to do this. It's just that I think that's the best way to do it. I don't like the caulking method. I rather use the grout, and then you make the grout line very thin, so you can basically not even see it at some point. But it does give the toilet more support, and that's why I like that method. Now, one thing I think you should look into, if you have a two-story house or something where your base is wood below your toilet, like a wood floor or wood beams or whatever, I wouldn't even suggest doing this yourself. Just hire somebody to do this. That way you won't have to worry about any leaks or anything like that, because you're always going to worry that there's a leak.